Acclaimed filmmaker Vanessa Engle to direct promotional films to celebrate the season. Award-winning writer Jeanette Winterson OBE to deliver this year's Dimbleby Lecture Brand. New commissions across TV, radio and online, from documentaries and discussions to short-form, digital and educational content. Newly announced today, acclaimed filmmaker Vanessa Engle will direct a series of short promotional films to celebrate the BBC's Hear Her season, while award-winning writer Jeanette Winterson OBE, pictured above, author of Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, will give this year's Dimbleby Lecture on BBC One, becoming the 42nd speaker of the annual lecture given in honour of legendary British broadcaster, Richard Dimbleby. Also on BBC One, hit genealogy series Who Do You Think You Are? Follows Our Girls star Michelle Keegan as she traces her family heritage, unearthing a special connection to suffragette leader Emmeline Pankhurst and extraordinary evidence of her great-great-grandmother's support for the fight for votes for women. Further programs announced include, a new observational documentary about Germaine Greer for BBC Two in Women's Monologues with Tea for BBC Four, an 8-part series of ambitious and challenging monologues from celebrated female playwrights. BBC Four will also air the mini primes of Muriel Spark with Kirsty Wark and broadcast the Donmar Warehouse's all-female Shakespeare trilogy, beginning with Julius Caesar in June. Meanwhile, BBC Three will dismantle taboos and rail against expectation in new 4-part series, Body Language. Charlotte Moore, director of BBC Content, says, "I am so proud to be bringing this important and wide-ranging season of content to audiences across the BBC. With so many bold and thought-provoking new commissions, Hear Her will look at how far female empowerment and equality has come over the past 100 years, examine what it is like to be a woman in 2018 and celebrate strong female voices and achievements." Vanessa Engle's short promotional film series will explore the past, present and future through voices of real women from across Britain and are set to make a bold and inspiring statement about being female in Britain today. Vanessa previously documented 3 generations of feminism in her series Women, and this project for the BBC promises to celebrate women's voices in an original and moving way. Vanessa Engle says, "As a documentary maker whose films have always been from a female perspective, as well as often being about women, I am delighted to be involved in the BBC's Hear Her season and making these trails which will convey the importance and urgency of giving women a voice. There are so many diverse women's stories needing to be told, and this feels like an especially exciting time to be telling them." 100 years on from the first women in the UK securing the right to vote and 60 years since women could be members of the House of Lords for the first time, Jeanette Winterson's Dimbleby Lecture will examine the recent campaigns promoting the equality of women and explore what can be learned from the suffragettes a century ago. This year, for the first time, the lecture will be given in the Houses of Parliament, in the Robing Room in the House of Lords, in honour of these important anniversaries. Jeanette Winterson says, "I am delighted to be asked to give this year's Dimbleby Lecture. I want to address how historically women have been outside of the clubs and boards, outside of the promotions and pay rises, outside of the mainstream, outside of our own bodies, struggling with weight, shape, fashion, attractiveness, threats, trolling, violence of every kind. And how in 2018 we are beginning to celebrate women on the inside." There will also be a range of programs across radio as part of the Hear Her season. BBC Radio 1 and BBC Radio 1 Extra will host a Sex and Consent Life Hack special and discuss female empowerment in 1 Extra Talks. BBC Radio 3 will continue to champion female artists and composers by broadcasting a track each weekday evening throughout the season from unsigned, undiscovered and under-the-radar female classical composers. On BBC Radio 4, Homefront will illustrate some of the huge changes to women's lives. The Listening Project will host an evening to celebrate women's suffrage, and Woman's Hour will continue to look at the achievements of the suffragists and suffragettes. 100 Women, an award-winning annual initiative from the BBC's International News Services, will reflect on the life of suffragette Emmeline Pankhurst, using never-before-seen personal letters. As part of the season, BBC Teach will also host a collection of curriculum-linked content for the classroom, including 100 Years of the Women's Movement and a history hunt to discover the story of the suffragette Muriel Matters. The unique Hear Her virtual reality experience will use the power of voice to break through the barriers faced by the suffragettes. Created by BBC VR Hub with Anagram, and incorporating archive interviews with suffragettes, it will empower users to follow Emmeline Pankhurst's advice and make more noise. Previously announced programs as part of the Hear Her season include Anne Robinson, What Women Want with Tea, BBC One, How Women Won the Vote with Lucy Worsley with Tea, BBC One, a special edition of Antiques Roadshow, BBC One, and The Great Art Fight Back, BBC Four. mass participation artwork processions, with commissions by over 100 women artists, will also be covered live on BBC One and on BBC News around the UK. MH2